people think they know this story. They think it's a story about one man. But when you pull back the curtain, it's actually about so much more.
A recent Netflix documentary series called Madoff, The Monster of Wall Street by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Joe Berlinger tells the story of the largest Ponzi scheme in history.
How could he fool so many people for so long?
What happened was so avoidable, and so many people enabled it to happen because of greed.
The film's other villain is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which received complaints about Madoff starting in the early 1990s, and yet not only failed to catch him, but helped enable his fraud. During one investigation, all SEC investigators had to do was check the routing number to verify a trade had actually occurred, which it hadn't, of course, because all of Madoff's trades were fake.
You could have shut Madoff down in 1/2 hour by just following up on one of his allegations that they were not conducting trades.
If you are the watchdog, you have totally and thoroughly failed in your mission. Don't you get it?
The Netflix series acknowledges that the SEC is complicit in Madoff's scam, and that he could have been caught if one investigator assigned to the case had done about 30 minutes of checking.
They asked the question, they got the information, they got the account number, but they never made the phone call. Inconceivable, and I never got an answer that made any sense, to be honest, from the people that we questioned under oath in depositions about this particular point. They forgot, they missed it, but it just doesn't make any sense.
It also blames deregulation and free market capitalism for making the fraud possible. The first episode sets the stage with a speech by Ronald Reagan.
Government, with its high taxes, excessive spending, and overregulation, had thrown a wrench in the works of our free markets. Our economic program for the next 4 years, we're going to turn the bull loose.
In episode 3, journalist Diana Henriquez makes the connection explicit.
Resources that had been in New York City on Wall Street's doorstep devoted to white-collar crime, to fraud, were being steered away, were being funneled into counterterrorism and terrorism finance issues. For the SEC, this was an exacerbation of an existing problem. As a result of a deregulatory campaign that began with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
The laws that they could rely on to pursue investigations had been tightened, and their budgets had been cut and cut again.
And yet nothing in the film would lead one to draw the conclusion that the SEC needed a bigger budget to catch Madoff. In fact, outsiders were sounding the alarm without access to government funding or regulatory muscle. In 2001, Barron's journalist Aaron Averland reported that many Wall Street investors were suspicious that Madoff was engaged in foul play. And the SEC received its first complaint that Madoff was running an unregistered investment company offering 100% safe investments in 1992. In 1999, a derivatives expert named Harry Markopoulos, who worked at a competing firm, started to alert the SEC that Madoff's investment returns were virtually impossible. In 2005, Markopoulos sent the agency an infamous 25-page memo explaining why the world's largest hedge fund is a fraud. The SEC opened an investigation in 2006 and then closed it the following year because the uncovered violations were remedied, and those violations were not so serious as to warrant an enforcement action.
We knew then that we had provided enough red flags and mathematical proofs where they should have been able to shut him down right then and there. Unfortunately, as they didn't respond to my written submissions in 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007, and 2008, here we are today.
So how is this tale of epic failure on the part of a government agency the fault of deregulation? Instead of making lazy allusions to the evils of free market capitalism, to better understand the lessons of the Madoff saga, director Joe Berlinger should have consulted the work of the free market economist George Stigler, who won the Nobel Prize in part for his work on regulatory capture. In a 1971 paper, The Theory of Economic Regulation, Stigler argues that while many people believe that regulation is instituted primarily for the protection and benefit of the public, in fact, it mainly serves the purposes of the largest companies being regulated, which form a symbiotic relationship with their regulatory overseers.
My thesis is that the industry body, in the long run, must act by and for the industry it is regulating, and not as a matter of venality, not as a matter of lack of integrity or lack of competence, but the political realities of life dictate that the regulatory bodies become affiliated with and help in what it believes to be the necessary conditions for the survival of its industry.
The essay focuses mainly on how regulators help existing companies by protecting them from competition, but Stigler's theory can also be used to better understand the SEC's failure to catch Madoff. In a 1972 essay, Stigler writes that the regulating agency must eventually become the agency of the regulated industry. They need each other. That's because the career lawyers at the SEC making the decisions have much more to gain personally from having a positive relationship with big industry players than antagonizing them. This is also what happened in the case of Sam Bankman-Fried, who was close with politicians and regulators and actively lobbied for regulation of the crypto industry in a bid to elbow out competitors right up to the moment that his crypto exchange, FTX, collapsed under the weight of its own alleged fraud. This cozy relationship between industry and regulators helps explain why the SEC continually missed what was right in front of them in the Madoff case.
When Harry Markopolos was trying to persuade the SEC that a gigantic, historically huge Ponzi scheme was being run at that very minute by Bernie Madoff, he was facing an enormous challenge because the SEC relied on Bernie Madoff as a source of Wall Street wisdom.
He had a tremendous reputation as being one of the real giants of Wall Street, not only for developments that he helped launch, changes in the industry that he helped define, but he also spent a lot of time working with the SEC and other government agencies on panels and assisting with how to regulate business.
Madoff even spread the rumor that he was being considered as a future chairman of the SEC.
At one point, he tells them that he is on the short list to become the next head of the SEC. And there's email communication between these two junior examiners and their boss, where the boss says to them in joking, maybe you can be Bernie's aides when he comes to take over the SEC. So they're awestruck to begin with.
Can all this be pinned on Ronald Reagan, deregulation, and the free market?
One guy led you to this pile of dung that is Bernie Madoff and stuck your nose in it, and you couldn't figure it out.
Is the SEC too cozy with the industry? Are they captive by this industry? Or are they looking out for us, looking out for the taxpayers?
The documentary also makes a strong case that the SEC didn't just fail to catch Madoff. Investors were emboldened by the agency's investigation of Madoff and failure to find serious violations, such as this man, who gave Madoff the proceeds from the sale of his small business.
The fact that the SEC found no evidence of wrongdoing was, to me, putting a stamp of approval on Madoff. So I sent a wire for $900,000 to Madoff.
That regulation is primarily for the protection and benefit of the public at large or some large subclass of the public, Stigler writes, is a commonly held view. But it's not. SEC investigators didn't want to be overly combative with Madoff because they thought doing so could hurt their careers. Regulation exists largely to serve the interests of the people being regulated. The illusion of competent regulation gave investors a false sense of security that drove them to make colossal mistakes. Can the answer really be more regulation? What if Harry Markopolos' warnings hadn't been filtered through the SEC? The average person is better equipped to spot a con man than we give him credit for. But the myth that regulators are primarily motivated to protect the interests of the public causes us to suspend our better judgment.
The individual consumer if he is not hampered, is in general capable of a large measure of self-defense against frauds, mishaps, bad luck, and the like in economic and social life. Not all consumers are intellectually competent and well-informed, but most consumers know how to build up defenses against the many vicissitudes that lie in real life. And it is primarily because we have socially so often hampered his effects that we have injured the consumer.
The big takeaway from Madoff, the monster of Wall Street, is that regulators unwittingly facilitated his fraud, just as they helped Sam Bankman-Fried run his alleged con. As you watch the Netflix series, think about how much more time or power should we really give them? Are they helping us or themselves?